As always, when it comes to mindfulness and paying attention, I noticed that I was having a little bit of an issue with my Monstera Deliciosa. So I figured I would take opportunity to talk to you all about Monstera Deliciosa and plant care. What are the plant requirements? What do they need? And maybe a little bit on the propagation side too. Let's go. What's going on, my plant peoples? I am the ADHD gardener, where I use gardening, houseplants, and humor as a form of mental health therapy. And I love monsteras. I got like 6 plants of those inside of my house. And I literally want them to create a jungle for me. So I want them to get big. I want them to get large. And I want them to overtake my house. Let's start off with the basics. Monstera Deliciosa is actually in Spanish. That literally translates to delicious monster. Now, obviously, you're not going to be eating it, but the reason why they call it a monster or monstera is for its size. Monstera Deliciosas can get really, really big. These Monstera Deliciosas are actually found in the southern part of Mexico, going all the way down to Panama. They are a tropical plant, and they love heat and humidity. Monstera Deliciosa plants are actually tropical, so if you live below zones 8, then chances are they're going to be a house plant for you. But if you live in zones 8 or higher, chances are you'll probably have them in your backyard because they can grow outside in tropical areas. Another fun fact about the Monstera Deliciosa comes from the plant family Araceae. Now that plant family Araceae, that actually has a bunch of subgenuses of plants. Now, I'm not really big on the scientific nature of all these different plants. I'm getting into that once I go into my master gardening class. But for now, I've done a little bit of research on it. It carries a lot of different subgenuses within that big plant family, and one of them is aroids. Now, if you're a houseplant lover, we all know what the aroids are. Now, the aroids are usually, not all, but generally, I want to say not all. Correct me if I'm wrong. Let me know down in the comments below. But when it comes to the aroids, typically that I've noticed is that a lot of them are epiphytic, which means they are holding onto or kind of latching onto another plant or a tree trunk of a plant, and they start to climb. Now that means that they require little to no soil. That's one of the wonderful things I love about the Monstera, is the fact that it is an aroid, which means it can take a drought. Let me know down in the comments below how many Monstera Deliciosas do you have in your house, because oof, I have at least 3, 4, 5, 6 of them, and I want them to take over my house. Just don't tell my boyfriend that is my plan, because he is not, actually he doesn't really mind that much. He doesn't mind. I mean, does he really have a choice though? Really? Now, one of the classic characteristics of a Monstera Deliciosa are those, they look like cuts on the leaves, but what that's actually called are fenestrations. And as the plant matures, it tends to split like that. Those rips or the holes in your plant, that's actually completely normal. You will only see those fenestrations actually when the plant starts to mature. So maybe when you find them in a home improvement store, maybe when you find those Monstera plants at a small stage, they are not going to have those fenestrations or holes inside of the leaves. That only comes with maturity over time. Now, in order for these plants to attach to something else, like a tree trunk, a tree slab, or anything for that matter, it starts to develop aerial roots. Instead of those root systems developing in the soil, the root systems develop on the outside and in the air. Aerial roots, air. If you look at your plant and you start seeing a bunch of these weird brown shoots or roots coming out of the plant, that's exactly what that is. Aerial roots. Now those aerial roots can get really large, really long, and really thick. Remember, this is a really big, large plant that can have the capabilities of growing really large. So those aerial roots have to be really strong in order to anchor that plant onto the tree trunk. Well, at least for me, I didn't find monsteras to be a big problem at all, and I would consider them to be great beginner plants because they can take a considerable amount of a little bit of use and neglect before, something really goes wrong. Now, when it comes to the soil, you do not want it damp at all times. It needs to dry out in between waterings. Remember, epiphytic. Remember, it's not really damp in the soil. It likes to climb up on stuff. It does not get a lot of water all the time. It likes to dry out. Now, when it comes to the potting mix, I would suggest making your own mix. You don't have to make your own mix. If you are not going to make your own potting soil mix, may I recommend cactus mix. I know that sounds counterintuitive, being that it says cactus mix, But the fact that it's cactus mix, you know that it's going to be freely draining. You know that those cactus do not like a lot of water, just like the Monstera Deliciosa. So I would add cactus mix. I would even add some like tree bark or like that orchid bark. That's fantastic for this too. But you can use regular, potting soil. You just have to amend it and make sure that it's got a lot of drainage. A lot of drainage. Because if you're not going to have a lot of drainage and you have some water retention soil, you're going to come up with a problem, and that is yellowing of leaves. Oh, trust me, you're going to know when your Monstera has received too much water. Those leaves will go yellow. Those leaves will get these really big brown spots on them, and chances are that leaf will die. And that's exactly what happened to this plant that I have in my living room. That plant needs to get repotted right there because that one is just a hot mess. As you see, there's a bunch of yellow leaves going on. I have brown spots, huge brown spots. That is because I overwatered it. Now, being that that specific plant has not been repotted and the soil has not been amended, that is why that plant went yellow. That's my fault. And that is because I have not repotted it yet. So that will be something that I have to do relatively soon in order to save my plants. Remember, Monsteras do not really like a lot of water. You are going to water it though, but just not as frequently as you would, let's say, a fern like this one, because this one requires a lot more water than a Monstera. Ferns love water. Monsteras don't like water so much. I would say water that maybe like once every 2 weeks. Once a week, depending on the amount of water that you're giving it. Now, if you know you have a good draining soil that's mixed with cactus mix and mixed with orchid bark and perlite and all that jazz, then you may have to water it like once a week. But if you don't have that mix and you only have potting soil with a little bit of perlite, oof, you may want to water it like maybe once every 2 weeks. Now, how to tell when your plant needs water? You're going to take your wonderful finger and you're going to give your soil a digital exam. Ah, sounds so bad. You're gonna take your finger, put it in the soil. I'm shoving my whole finger. God, that sounds terrible. I'm shoving my whole finger in the soil. I put my finger deeper into the soil because some soils are not all created the same way. So some of them get a lot more drier than others, but yet at the bottom is still saturated. So you should have absolutely nothing being stuck on your finger. Next thing is lighting requirements. This is a tropical plant. It loves light, but not direct. Ideally, you do not want to have direct sunlight on these leaves because it will burn, it will crisp up, brown, and just not look good. It does not like direct. However, it does like bright indirect. Remember, a lot of these plants are latching onto another one that probably has a canopy with a bunch of leaves on top. So they're getting bright, but not direct bright shining on there. Now, if you do not have grow lights inside of your house, ideally you want this at a south facing window. You want this in an east facing window, something where there's a lot of bright light. Remember, nothing direct. So if you have a south facing window and you have bright direct light on it, it may burn, and then you may want to push your plant a little further back away from the window. Shade is awesome. The plant can grow in shaded areas. However, it's going to be a little more stringy, it's going to be a little more leggy, and the leaves are actually going to be a lot smaller. Now, unfortunately, as much as I love this plant and I want those big leaves, I have a few of my plants in not the best lit spaces, and you're going to see that. I have a Monstera that's in my living room, and it is not the brightest of light. It's actually in a corner, far away from any grow light, really. So the leaves are relatively small and the stems are really long. Now, the room that I'm in right now is actually south facing. So the Monstera that I have in this room is beautiful, and the leaves are big and fenestrated and everything. So remember, the more light you give it, the more fenestrations, the more larger the leaves will get. During the wintertime, or you don't have a south-facing window, let's look into some grow lights. These plants love light, so please provide it with some grow lights or some other artificial light source so these plants can keep growing. I'm sure ideally that these plants are used to 60% humidity and up. However, I don't have 60% humidity in the wintertime or in the spring or fall. I only have that amount of humidity in the summer. I still have them surrounded by other humidity-loving plants, so I'm assuming it's probably getting a little bit of humidity from the surrounding other plants around here. And plus, I do have humidifiers that I put on every now and again. But could your plant survive without the humidity and all that? I think it would do pretty good. I mean, don't stick it with like a 20% humidity. Don't stick it with like no humidity, but at least 40% humidity can work out really good. I would even say 35 and it would do pretty good, but don't quote me on that one. Now, when it comes to pests or bugs or any of that nature, now this plant was tested because I had a massive mealybug problem that hit my palm tree plants, and those palm trees are right directly underneath my Monstera. And I don't see anything on my Monstera. I've had spider mite problems up in here. I've had aphid problems, but it never really got attached to the Monstera. So far so good. I didn't really see any problems with my plant when it comes to pests. When it comes to propagation in Monstera, they are so simple and it's so easy. And you can definitely propagate it with water. And that is my ideal way of propagating the Monstera. When it comes to propagation, you want to propagate this or cut this in the springtime. I've even done it in the summertime, and I've even done it in the fall time. But in the wintertime, I would avoid the winter. When it comes to propagating, you're gonna go look for a node. A node is actually where the plant leaf comes out of. That's where the node is. So basically, you're gonna be cutting in between two different plant leaves. Because if the node is where the plant leaf comes out of, and then you'll have a space in between, and that's where you're gonna cut. Now, after you cut it, the ideal way of propagating it is to put it in water. That propagation is going to take a while. It's not going to be overnight, and it's not even going to be within a week. I want to say 2 weeks to a month before you start seeing some roots and whatnot. It may take some time, but it will do it. I'm sure you could propagate it and put it into soil directly. If you are going to do that, I would suggest root hormone powder. Now, that root hormone powder will encourage more root growth. So that's probably what you would need if you're going to be putting it directly into the soil. Propagating through soil takes twice as long as water. So if you want some roots really fast, or at least decently fast, then you want to put it in water. Now let's say you do have your Monstera in water and it has developed roots. Now you have two options. You can either plant it up in soil, or you can actually leave it in water. Lecca balls, which are those little clay bolitas that you have, you find them usually in hydroponics and semi-hydro. Those little bolitas, those little balls, I put them in the jar or in the vase, whatever I am propagating that Monstera in, just to hold it up, prop it up, and let it develop some roots. Now, you actually can leave it in the water, but I have noticed that, again, it does not like to be fully submerged. So what I kind of do is a semi-hydro. And it's actually a play off of the crack key method. It's another form of hydroponics. I love these plants, and I gotta say, my houseplants keep me alive throughout the wintertime. When I know that in the winter I cannot go outside and garden, my houseplants keep me afloat. They keep me surrounded by green at all times. We even have the cousin. Now, the Monstera Deliciosa actually has a cousin, and that is called the Monstera Adansonii. And I love this one too. The care for the Monstera Deliciosa is the same care that you would do for your Adansonii. The same thing. These Monsteras love to climb, they love to vine, they love to attach onto something. So that means you're going to have to give it something to attach to. That generally means that you're going to either get a moss pole or something a little more creative like a tree slab or something like that. You want it to attach to that. I did a few videos on moss poles. I'm going to drop one right up here. If you do not provide something for this plant to attach to, it will just grow wild. I mean, it will spread all over the place. It will probably attach onto another plant that you have next door. It's a mess. So please, you're going to need a moss pole. You're going to need something for that plant to latch onto. I really hope that you go buy yourself a Monstera. They are beautiful plants and they get really big. And the bigger they get, that means the happier they are. If you did enjoy this video and you want to show me some love, then don't forget to smash that like button. I really appreciate it. Also, if you haven't already, then consider subscribing. I drop a video every week and then some in between. And don't forget about that notification bell, because without the bell, you won't know I'm dropping a video. And last but not least, you can catch me on Facebook and Instagram. I'm on there all the time. You can drop me a message. I drop a lot of funny memes, DIY projects, behind the scenes of my videos, and a little bit on the personal life, because a girl got a vent every now and again. So until the next episode, you guys, you and me are going to be planting our happiness one plant at a time, one day at a time. I'll check you out in the next episode. Peace and love.